We have it pretty good here in America. I mean, for the most part, you can express your faith in Jesus Christ or anyone or anything else without major persecution. We're starting to see a little bit of persecution here and there, but in many countries around the world, you can be jailed, tortured, even killed for expressing your faith in Jesus. Nigeria is one of those countries, and today I'll be talking with Brad Brandon of Across Nigeria about the deaths of thousands of Christians across that country and why we in America should get involved. Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching Tami's Take here on Divine Family Entertainment. I'm Tami DeVine. The things you'll hear me say are my take. Take it or leave it. I hope you'll take it to heart. So let's get started right now with Brad Brandon. Thanks so much for joining us, Brad.
Tami, always good to be on with you. And I'm excited to get on Tami's Take.
I appreciate that. And we'll hear your take here. I'm very excited to hear your take. Let's start off, Brad, with talking about what's the latest going on. Now, earlier, a few months ago, we heard about President Trump and his administration making Nigeria a country of particular concern. And but then, it kind of fell off the map. Every now and then we hear about Christians getting killed and persecuted. Why don't you tell us the latest of what's happening there?
Yeah, the latest is, and you're absolutely right. President Trump put Nigeria back on the country of particular concern list. That's an official designation with the State Department, so that's significant. The Biden administration, one of the first things that they did was take that off take Nigeria off the country of particular concern. That year, there were 7,000 Christians that were killed in Nigeria. So it's not every administration that does this. So that's very significant to have a president to do that. And I'm not being political. I always tell people I'm not political. I have one issue. My issue is Nigeria. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, if you're for Nigeria and helping Christians there, I'm for you.
And the truth is the truth, right? It's this is a fact.
That's the facts. And but one of the things that President Trump also did was he took it a step further in that shortly after that, he made some tweets about persecuted Christians in Nigeria. And then ultimately on Christmas Day, he ordered airstrikes in northwest Nigeria. And I just got back from being there for about 3 months. I got back here in the U.S. about 2 weeks ago. And while I was there, there were 3 sets of airstrikes that struck in the Northeast, taking out ISIS's number 2 in command, and also 200 Boko Haram soldiers throughout Northeast Nigeria. So the current administration is taking some significant steps that have not been taken before to not attack Nigeria. And I should be very clear about that, because I've heard allegations of, the current administration is attacking Nigeria. That's not true. They are cooperating with the Nigerian government to take out and minimize terrorist organizations like ISIS and Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. And that needs to happen. The thing is that needs to continue to happen. And you touched on this a little bit already. What sometimes some administrations and the United States government has a history of doing is going in and dropping a few bombs and then thinking that solves the problem, and they abandon the situation. That actually makes the problem worse because it creates a vacuum. So what we're encouraging the current administration, the Trump administration, and the State Department to continue kinetic action against Boko Haram strongholds and ISWAP strongholds, that's the Islamic State of West Africa, but continue that while organizations like ours bring in aid to improve socioeconomic conditions, which is another key element in bringing stabilization to northern Nigeria. To give you the very latest, the killing continues to get worse. I've never seen it as bad. We've been working in Nigeria for over a decade, and I've never seen it as bad as it is right now. We just had 22 that were killed in one of our communities earlier this week. Before that, there were 14. Before that, there were 10. I can't even keep up with the attacks against Christians that's happening in northern Nigeria right now. So it's significantly gotten worse, even just in the last year.
And you were talking about a couple of different groups that the Trump administration targeted: Boko Haram, ISWAP, and what happened to the Fulani Muslims?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I explain the Fulani Muslims this way. There are terrorist groups in northern Nigeria. That's what most people know. Boko Haram, ISWA, the Islamic State of West Africa. There's also new groups like Lakurawa and some other factional groups as well. The Fulani are not a terrorist group. They're an ethnic group of people that often are co-opted by terrorist groups. Terrorist groups and radical Islam globally targets underserved communities, disadvantaged communities, often isolated communities. Radical Islam will co-opt these groups, give them radicalized ideas and turn them into terrorists, and then turn them around to do their terrorist threats and actions and things like that. That's largely what's happening among the Fulani communities, is that their literacy rate among their children is less than 1%. They have very little opportunities to further themselves. They live out in the bush. They're isolated. So it's very easy for them to get drawn into radicalization, and that's what's happening. But to put it in perspective, because we work with a lot of Fulani communities, we actually bring literacy to a large number of Fulani communities throughout northern Nigeria, hoping to improve those socioeconomic conditions so they're not drawn into radicalism. But just to put it into perspective, there's 17.5 million Fulani in Nigeria. And a small percentage of those Fulani are right now causing a significant amount of the violence in Nigeria. So not all Fulani are terrorists, not all Fulani are bandits and radicalized. A small percentage of them have been radicalized, but yet, in all truthfulness, that small percentage is causing a significant amount of the violence.
Okay. I'm reading up on what's happening in Nigeria through some news articles, Brad, and I'm seeing words like alleged Christian genocide. And I'm seeing, bogus claims of Christians being killed. Words like that. Is there any question that this persecution is happening?
Not in my mind. I live it almost every day. I just got, about 4 weeks ago, we got an alert that one of our communities was being attacked. We got there about an hour after the attack, and there were 14 people that were slaughtered in that attack. We wrapped their bodies up. We dug the mass grave. We put their bodies in the mass grave. We did a burial service for them. I did a burial service for eight Christians that were killed in an attack. When we left that community where 14 were killed, we went to another attack that was happening. 10 were slaughtered there. We buried them as well. An hour after we left, another attack happened on that community, and another 5 were killed. So at this point, I've stood at more mass graves than I can remember. And to me, there is no alleged. There is no, a question about the genocide that's happening or bogus claims. This is a reality that Christians in northern Nigeria live with. And I'm sad that this issue has become political. I never thought that a slaughter of over 70,000 Christians since 2009, 3.5 million Christians in IDP camps because they're displaced because their homes and villages have been destroyed, 18,000 churches destroyed since 2009. I never thought that something like that would become a left-right issue or a Republican-Democrat issue or conservative-liberal issue. But sadly, it has in this country. The Nigerian government, I should add, has done a great job at cleaning up their global image. We uncovered last December that they had hired a Washington, D.C. based PR firm to basically whitewash their global image. So they were lobbying members of Congress and the White House to convince them that this genocide wasn't happening. That was a $9 million contract. And I wonder what $9 million could do for the suffering Christians in northern Nigeria. But on top of that, just to add this, we also have uncovered some evidence that they've been paying members of mainstream media to keep this off the airwaves and keep silent about this. So that answers one of the questions as to why this isn't being talked about in the media. Now, the reason that they're doing this is financially driven, and I'll explain it real quickly this way. In 2024, there was about $570 billion that was divested of foreign investors, took their money out of Nigeria because of the instability. Nigeria is trying to get those investors back, but they need to clean up their global image first in order to get those dollars back into their economy. So they need to clean up their image, and they need to whitewash their image in the media and with members of Congress and elected officials here in the United States. So it all boils down to money, and that's blood money. Christians are dying because of that money. And so that kind of answers the question of what the Nigerian government is doing and what they're doing behind the scenes to either help or hurt this genocide.
And from what I understand, Brad, the consulting firm, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but was it the consulting firm that really kind of pressured the Nigerian government to speak out strongly against what President Trump wanted to do and what he tweeted about doing? Because at first, the president of Nigeria was came out kind of with strong language against it. And then suddenly he kind of reversed course. So I'm trying to figure out what happened in the in-between.
Well, the president of Nigeria and his administration has always taken the stance that this is a hoax. That basically what their stance is officially they'll say, yes, there is violence and instability in northern Nigeria, but it's equal opportunity violence, meaning just as many Muslims are being targeted and killed as Christians. And I can tell you from my experience on the ground, that is absolutely not true. Now, there are Muslims that are being targeted, but they're being targeted because they don't hold the radical beliefs of Boko Haram and ISWAP. And so those groups will target Muslims who don't share their radical beliefs. But if you look at the statistics, Christians are 5 times more likely to be killed than any other group in northern Nigeria. That tells me it's not equal opportunity, that Christians are being inordinately targeted there in that region.
And it is because of radical Muslims. They just sometimes have different names, right?
That's
so this
right.
is about implementing Sharia law. It's about conquest. It's about conquering and getting rid of the Christians that are maybe standing in their way, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly what they're after.
Let's talk about the Sharia law. What is it, and why can't Muslims peacefully coexist with the Christians in Nigeria and in other countries?
Well, I'm careful in how I answer that. I think Muslims, by and large, can coexist alongside Christians. They've done so for decades. If you go back 25 years ago in northern Nigeria, there's communities where Christians and Muslims were living side by side, sometimes in the same community. Half the community was Muslim, half the community was Christian, and they celebrated festivities together. They ate meals in each other's homes. There are some places in northern Nigeria where that's still happening, but by and large, that's not happening anymore. So I am always careful to say it's radical Islam that is driving the violence. And you're right about Sharia law. 12 of the northern Nigeria states right now are controlled by Sharia law. Sharia law is sort of Sharia law is the law. There's no separation of church or religion and state. The religion of Islamic rule is the law. And under Sharia law, there's all kinds of barbaric things that happen. In northern Nigeria, it's a particularly strict form of Sharia law. But one of the things is under the blasphemy doctrines of Sharia law, if you're a Muslim or come from a Muslim family and you convert and become a Christian, that is a crime punishable by death. meaning that your family can legally kill you or they can hire somebody to kill you, and it's all legal. That sounds like a strange concept to us here in the West, but I can tell you that that happens every single day. We have an entire refugee facility filled with people who are being hunted and are on the run because their families have put contracts out on their life because they've left the oppressive system of Islam and become Christians. Some other things about Sharia law: this is the kind of place where if you're caught stealing, they'll cut off your hand. I actually know people who have both hands cut off because they've been caught stealing numerous times throughout their life. I've met several people like that. Their eyes gouged out for different offenses, 40 lashes or canings from doing drugs. This is a system where a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's testimony. So you can imagine the abuse that runs rampant through those communities. Abuse against women. Women are viewed as property under Sharia law, not people. These are the kinds of things that Sharia law brings into a society.
Yeah. Why should Americans get involved here, Brad? Because we hear this stuff and we're like, it's happening way over there.
Right.
It's not really impacting my life right now, but it could eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it was Martin Luther King who said it best. He said, an injustice to one is an injustice to all. So a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's what we see happening. We see the beginning stages of Sharia law being implemented, or at least the attempt to bring it here to the United States. This has already been done in parts of Europe. There are areas under Islamic rule in large European cities like Berlin and London and Geneva and other parts. These are areas that are called no-go zones. It means that first responders can't even enter these Islamic ruled areas. Police can't enter. Paramedics can't enter into these areas because they're Islamic rule. These are happening in Western countries. So the spread of Sharia law is real. And it is serious, even here in the United States. There are, I believe, 16 states right now that have on the books legislation to outlaw Sharia law because of the threat that it poses. One case that I can think of here in the United States is back in 2009. There was a Superior Court judge who was ruling on a case of domestic abuse. Islamic woman had accused her husband of abuse. The judge consulted the family's imam, and the family's imam, because the woman's testimony was worth half that of a man's, believed the testimony of the husband. So he took the ruling of that imam and brought it into his superior court. That's the beginning stages of Sharia law having an influence on our judicial system. Now, thank God that case was eventually overturned. But if you look at places like the UK, they have the Arbitration Act, which calls for Sharia rulings to be used as precedent in their own courts. So this is a very real threat that's spreading through the West. That's one reason us here in the United States should be concerned about it. The other is the Christians here in the US should be concerned about it, because the Bible tells us that if there are brothers and sisters in Christ who are suffering for the cause of Christ, we need to join ourselves with them and bind ourselves to them. Paul says in Hebrews 13:3, as though it's happening to us. And I always ask people, what would you do if it was your parents who were suffering this, or your children who were suffering this? You would do anything and everything to stop it. And that's what the church here in the United States needs to do, is they need to be crying from the mountaintops about this genocide that's been going on for the last 15 years. And they need to not stop crying about it until this ends. Every pulpit should be filled with information and people being made aware of the genocide that's happening every day in northern Nigeria.
Yeah. there are some people that are saying Europe is pretty much conquered, with Sharia law, with Islam, radical Islam, as you call it. And, the no-go zones that you talked about, how frightening for anybody who might look different or who professes Christ,
Right.
to go to these areas. And you talked about Sharia law, kind of creeping into the United States as well. We're seeing this happening in places like New York now. I mean, Muslims will take over streets, Times Square, I think recently,
Yes.
to do their call to prayer. And there are communities, I think Paterson, New Jersey, recently I saw a video where the call to prayer is happening 5 times a day. And the Christians there are going, what in the world is this? Why do we have to be subjected to that? And they're still free to worship however they want to worship in their mosques. And that's what Christians do. We worship in our churches,
That's right.
So why is this call to prayer happening 5 times a day? We know enclaves in Dearborn, Michigan.
That's
Right.
right.
And quite a few other places. There's places in Texas now.
Right.
Texas, right?
Of all places.
That's shocking to a lot of Americans, but the word really isn't getting out there that a lot of courts are starting to implement that here in the United States. That should be a deep cause for concern.
Yes. Even in parts of Minneapolis, I was watching sort of a man on the street video not too long ago, and they went onto the streets of Minneapolis and they were asking Muslims, what should be more important, the United States Constitution or Sharia law? Every person that they interviewed said the Constitution of the United States should be torn up and Sharia law should be put in its place. Wow. I was shocked. I'm from Minnesota. I grew up in St. Paul, one of the twin cities of Minneapolis, and I was shocked to hear that coming out of my hometown.
Yeah. And you look at New York with Mamdani now in charge, and he's allowing a lot of these things to happen also there. And regular American citizens voted him in. Now you think about the radical Muslims who were involved with the 9/11 attacks. And then President Obama had actually tried to allow a mosque to be built on Ground Zero. This is something a lot of people don't know.
That is true. Yes.
When something like that happens, it is a conquest. It is like, we won and we're building a mosque on this site to show that we won. And now, in this day and age, 25 years later, to have a Muslim mayor and to see the Sharia creeping in, did we forget? We forgot. We vowed never to forget.
How quickly we forgot. Yeah. And that's happening. This is the same thing in northern Nigeria. It is a conquest. You're absolutely right about that. Radical Muslims see any kind of sign of capitulation or even kindness. They see that as a sign of weakness, and they'll take advantage of it. I've seen that over and over. I've often referred to radical Islam as the only thing that they respond to is the iron fist. Anything else they view as a sign of weakness. However, that's happening in northern Nigeria. When I was there about 2 months ago, we started getting videos sent to us by Boko Haram and by ISWAP, and they were posting it all over social media, telling all the Christians to convert to Islam or die. They were also telling all of us Christians in northern Nigeria that we should leave northern Nigeria immediately or we will be killed. that they were taking over and that they were running Christians out of northern Nigeria. These are all things that they're saying. I'm not putting words in their mouth. They're saying these things and putting it out on social media. So even in Nigeria, it's about a conquest to take over an entire region. And so far, they've been very successful. We're seeing violence and attacks happening south of Abuja, which is further south than we've seen attacks happening in the past. So they're even taking over parts of southern Nigeria now.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understood, the way Nigeria kind of worked for the longest was that, kind of the Muslim stayed in the north, the Christian stayed in the south. But like you said, they were kind of working together. Like from what Native Nigerians have told me is that they take turns even with the government. Like, for one term, it's a Muslim president. For another term, it's a Christian president, and back and forth like that. Is that still going on?
No, that's not happening. In fact, Nigeria likes to poise itself as sort of this all-inclusive nation, this cosmopolitan country, that's very progressive compared to the rest of Africa. So they like to say, we're a Christian nation, we're a Muslim nation, we're a nation of Christians and Muslims. The issue comes down to the last two presidents have been Muslims. And ignored this genocide. And in fact, some would even claim, and I would say even rightly so, that they have even helped this genocide in some ways. But if you look at the Constitution of Nigeria, this is the governing law of the land. It mentions Sharia law or Islam 147 times. It mentions Christianity 0 times.
Wow.
So it is not like this is a half and half, equal opportunity governance. It is heavily leaning Islam, and radical Islam is taking advantage of that to take over the entire country. If something isn't done, the entire country of Nigeria will be radical Islam and run by radical Islam, at least within the next 15 or 20 years.
Do you see the president, the things that President Trump and his administration doing? Like, is it making a dent right now? Is it making any difference right now?
I don't want to discourage anybody or even the president, because he is the only president who's done anything in recent history about this. So what he's doing, we're very grateful for, and I'm very appreciative of. However, more of it needs to happen, and it needs to happen more frequently. These airstrikes against Boko Haram and ISWAP and Lakurawa, they need to be happening on a weekly basis. They need to be minimized. The strongholds of these terrorist groups need to be absolutely obliterated. And then what needs to happen is aid coming in, micro organizations like ours who can bring the resources to the people who need it most on the ground. They need to be coming in to improve socioeconomic conditions. I'll give you one example of this real quick. Wherever we have planted a school in a Muslim community, the violence in that area drops by about 60 to 70%.
Wow.
And it shows the power of when you give literacy, because we teach Muslim children not only to read and write Hausa, which is the language of northern Nigeria, we teach them to read and write English, which is the national language of Nigeria because it's a former British colony. So you can imagine
international business language, right?
That's right. Yeah. You can imagine the disadvantage that Muslim children, particularly Fulani Muslim children, are put in when they can't read and write their own language and they can't read and write the national language of their country. So when we go in teaching them to read and write Hausa and English, it's like giving them a college education.
Mm-hmm.
And they steer away from the violence and the radicalization because they have other opportunities that open up for them for the very first time. So it shows the importance, one example that shows the importance of also improving socioeconomic conditions along with the airstrikes and taking out Boko Haram and ISWAP strongholds.
Okay. I heard you say that you and other Christians who are regularly or in Nigeria and who live in Nigeria have been told you must convert. or die. And I know they also, I think sometimes talk about, I think it's called the jizya, the tax. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Yeah.
You pay a heavy tax. I don't know how much of that is being put
Right.
in there. But as a Christian, and you're there, you are, I believe, and let me just ask, are you spreading the gospel along with the education and humanitarian aid?
Yeah, absolutely we are. Now, we do it a little differently, and I'll explain it this way. We do it by building relationships with communities. We believe that the Bible calls the fruit of the Spirit fruit for this reason. Fruit is the reproductive organ of a plant. So if you cut open an apple, there's apple seeds inside. It's how the apple tree reproduces. So that's why God says what's produced by the Holy Spirit in our lives is fruit. So the love, the joy, the peace, all of those things act as seeds that help us to plant faith in the lives of the people around us. So we go in bearing the fruit of the Spirit, and we look for opportunities that God opens the door for us to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. We've seen many Muslims even convert to Christianity at the risk and peril of their own lives.
Wow.
We have even started a Bible Institute that trains specifically geared for or designed for training former Muslims who now want to become pastors and evangelists for our organization. So we
Wow.
are actively preaching the gospel, but we're not doing it by waving Bibles and handing out gospel tracts and standing on the street corner. We wouldn't last very long if we did that.
Wow.
But we do it by building relationships.
That's awesome. One of my favorite sayings, and I always butcher it, so please bear with me, is something like, when you go out to witness to others about Jesus Christ, like, be a great witness, and if you
Yeah.
have to, use words.
Use words. That's right. Yeah.
Right?
That's
So
kind
it's
of what
like,
we do.
you can lead a lot of people to Christ without having to beat them over the head with a lot of words. And
That's right. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Yeah.
Amen. Absolutely. And so let's hear a little bit about your testimony, if you would, Brad, how you came to Christ and how you came to lead across Nigeria.
Yeah, I grew up in a single mother home in a tenement in St. Paul, Minnesota, with two of my sisters. My mom was very faithful at going to church after a neighbor friend of hers witnessed to her, shared the gospel with her. My mom grew up in a semi-religious house, or in religion, but she never knew Jesus Christ personally. So it was through her friend across the hall in the tenement house that we lived in that witnessed to her, and my mom came to Christ. After that, my mom faithfully brought us to church, whether we liked it or not. We were in church when the doors were open. And on a Sunday night, our pastor was preaching the gospel, and I remember I was about 7 years old. Even as a child, the gospel is so simple that even a 7-year-old can
That's
understand
right.
it.
That's right.
And it's pride that keeps people from understanding the gospel. So I went forward, and my pastor showed me from the Bible how I could know Jesus as my Savior. And so I received Christ as my Savior, asked him into my life to forgive my sins, and I put my trust in his death, burial, and resurrection. And it radically changed my life. Even as a 7-year-old, I started witnessing to my grandparents, and,
Wow.
they were kind of not interested, but they were listening because I was their grandchild and things like that. I was witnessing to my friends in the neighborhood. I had those, I don't know if you remember those little mini Bibles with the smiley face on the front of them.
Yeah.
I had gotten hold of a bunch of those, and I was handing them out to everybody in our neighborhood. And I went away from the Lord in my teenage years. I kind of rebelled. And by God's grace, through the help of my wife and the prayers of other people, I got back into church and started taking God seriously again and became a pastor. I started a church in near my hometown in Minnesota, and then eventually moved to Connecticut to take over a church. And it was through that process that God led me to a ministry in Nigeria. when we started that ministry, it grew so quickly, I couldn't keep up with it. Eventually, I had to resign my position as a pastor and focus entirely on our work in Nigeria, and that's what I'm doing now.
Wow. That's amazing. I love how God had a hold of you as a child.
Yes.
And there's that verse, and I'm always bad with exactly where in the Bible it says I need to work on that. But train up a child in the way that he should go, right? And when he's older, he's not going to depart from it. Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of Christian parents out there that hold that verse close to their hearts because of prodigal children. But it seems like you're the perfect example of why we should never give up and never stop praying for our children who rebel or go astray.
That's right. My mom was very good at growing us, raising us in a Christian environment, even though she was a single mom and it was very difficult financially and other things. She always kept God and church and Christ at the forefront of everything we did in the home that I grew up in. And I appreciate my mom for that, because I know she made sacrifices for that.
Just so grateful that there are folks like you out there working to bring Christ to, sometimes the most remote corners of the world, like in different parts of Nigeria. I just wonder what it's like for you, though, as a Christian, just personally, to have witnessed what you have witnessed, to know that there are believers out there being martyred for the sake of Christ. What is it like for you and for your team as you're, I guess basically having to deal with the fallout of even people involved in your organization being persecuted like this?
Yeah, I think what it looks like on the ground is we often get caught up in the statistics of how many deaths happened in this attack and all of that. But what we see on the ground is the aftermath of those attacks. We see those who were injured in the attacks but survived. We see the children whose parents were killed, or the parents whose children were killed. And we see the people, we regularly bringing people to the hospital after an attack. The hospitals are expensive in Nigeria. One of the things that our organization does then is help with medical expenses for Christians who've been affected by the attacks. So we see the on the ground effects of it, not just the statistics. And it's given us a lot of great opportunities to have amazing relationships with people who've gone through these things. One example of where we have 571 widows under our care right now. All of those widows are women who've lost their husbands in this violence. One woman that I know of, I'll not say her name, but she was feeding her child, breastfeeding her child when her house was attacked in her village. They killed her baby who she was feeding. They killed her other son, and they killed her husband. And she raised her hand as sort of a defensive move when the machete came down and it cut her hand off. She's one of the widows in our care. Now, she wasn't killed. She's not in the statistics, but yet her suffering goes on and on.
She felt the impact of it.
Yeah, that's right. And we give grief counseling to our widows who are suffering that. I mean, they've suffered horrible and seen horrible things. Some of them, their own children killed in front of their eyes. And they need help with that. They need help on how to process that emotionally, just like anybody else would in the world. So we're there. And one of the things that we do with the widows in our care is offer them counseling, spiritual counseling, and also just emotional counseling to help them process what they've seen.
Yeah. Well, you have said that Christians should care and they should get involved. How can they get involved, and what can we do?
I think the biggest thing that I always encourage people to do is to pray. Pray for the situation, number one. The best way that I can tell people to pray is to go on our website and go to acrossnigeria.org and sign up for our email updates. Our emails are sent out every 2 weeks, and we give people real-time information on what's going on in Nigeria, what's happening in our ministry, what the latest news is, what God is doing. So we give people updated information and accurate ways that they can pray. So acrossnigeria.org, and just sign up for our email updates. And the two things mostly that I ask people to pray for is, number one, pray for the persecuted. Of course, they need our prayers more than anybody. But I also ask people to pray that God would open the hearts of the persecutors. We've seen people who've even persecuted Christians come to know Jesus Christ. So we know that God answers those prayers. Just like God opened the heart of Lydia in the book of Acts, and when Paul preached the gospel to her, she came to know Jesus as her Savior. It's the same way with the terrorists. We pray that God would open their hearts to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then I think the other thing that people can do, and this is lastly, most important thing, is to pray. And I'm not saying that just to be polite, but I think people can go to our website and support us financially at acrossnigeria.org. It takes finances to do what we do and help the persecuted Christians that we're helping. So any donations that people give go straight to the mission field for that purpose at acrossnigeria.org.
Well, may the Lord continue to bless your work. And you had mentioned how Across Nigeria has grown very fast, very quickly. And I think that's a great and wonderful thing. And I hope that everybody watching heard what you had to say and were moved to help across Nigeria and to help the families of the people who are, and some of the people themselves who are being persecuted and attacked just for believing in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Brad, for joining us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tami, and thank you for taking time to draw attention to this very important issue. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode of Tami's Take here on Divine Family Entertainment. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to Brad Brandon for joining us here on Tami's Take. Now, the things you heard Brad say are his take. The things you heard me say are my take. You can take it or leave it, but I hope you'll take it to heart. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.